All right, so we pick up where we left off. Of course, we're in the book of Genesis. And when we last met, if you remember, if you were here, we saw the conflict between Jacob and between Esau. Remember the blessing? Previous weeks we saw how Esau sold a birthright, and then now he was looking for the blessing, and then he didn't get the blessing. Now, it was through somewhat of a manipulation of circumstances through Rebekah and through Jacob, kind of playing Isaac, if you will. But ultimately, it came down to God's sovereignty, right? God said the older Esau would serve the younger Jacob. So regardless of how it happened, it happened. And Esau was angry, right? We saw this last time. Determined to get his revenge on Jacob. And so Rebekah was like, oh, well, we gotta hatch another plan. Send Jacob away to my family in Haran. And she thought it was going to be a few days. Just a few days. He'll be there for a few days. He'll come back. What she didn't realize, it was going to be 20 years. In fact, it would be the last time, we stated this last time, it would be the last time when Jacob left that his mother, Rebekah, would see his face. She would see his face no more. And that was a consequence of her own sinful manipulation of the circumstance and situation, not trusting in God. So, as Jacob heads out, we saw last time as well, there was this moment where he had a dream. And we talked about that. And that dream constituted what we call Jacob's ladder. And we saw as well how Christ represents, that ladder represents Christ, and that Christ is that connection point. He is the connection between heaven and earth. In fact, without Christ, man is hopelessly lost. He's actually doomed. Mankind is doomed to eternity separated from God. So that's what that ladder represents. And so now we kind of come to where we are tonight, and that's in chapter 29. Chapter 29, we're going to look at two chapters, 29 and 30. So let's kind of just jump right in. Verse 1 of chapter 29, we'll start there. So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. Right, Haran. Now, when he hears Haran, Jacob's like, all right, I made it. I'm here. I'm pretty close, right? They're just outside of Haran. So he kind of moves forward. He keeps going. He says in verse 5, then he says to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. And he said to them, is he well? Like kind of 20 questions here. And they said, he is well. And then they say, and look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Right? So far, so good. He's asking the right questions. They're giving him the right answers. And it's like perfect timing again, right? We saw that with Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, when he went to find a wife for Isaac. That perfect timing. Here again, perfect timing again as well. Jacob gets there. He's asking him the questions, and they're like, hey, well, you speaking of what we were talking about, here comes the daughter, Rachel. So there he goes. In verse 7, he says, and he said, look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. Now you're thinking, what is that? That's a weird kind of sentence right in the middle of all these greetings, right? What was Jacob talking about? What's happening here? Well, if you remember, Jacob, back with his family, he was the shepherd. He took care of his father's flocks, and they had a lot, right? So listen, if anything Jacob knew shepherding. He knew how to take care of sheep, right? And the fact is that these sheep were being brought to be watered in the middle of the day meant that they were wasting the rest of the day. In other words, back in the day when you had those flocks, you would send out the flocks all day long to be in the pasture during the day to eat and so on and so forth. And then you normally would bring the flocks back in the evening, and then you would water them at that point in time. So what Jacob is doing, he's actually noticing right away there's an inefficiency of what Laban's shepherds were doing. Now this is going to come into play in just a little bit, because Jacob is going to become one of Laban's chief shepherds. He's going to take care of the flocks for him, and God will begin to use Jacob to prosper Laban. And so he's already seeing, hey, there's an issue here. Why are they here? They're kind of skiving off a little bit. They're bringing the sheep in midday, and then they're like, oh, we watered them, and now we're done for the day. That was a no-go, right? So we'll see that as we move along. Then the shepherds answered Jacob, so he's this outsider telling them something, right? So they said, well, we cannot, until all the flocks are gathered together, and they roll the stone from the well's mouth, and then we water the sheep. It's like they're saying, listen, pal, you're an outsider. I don't know how you do it there back in the Canaan land, but here in Haran, this is how we do it, right? That's kind of their attitude. That's just typical, human behavior, right? Like, who are you to tell us? You're not from here, So we'll see how things will change with Jacob kind of in charge, so to speak. Verse 9, he says, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Now, it's interesting because, it tells us he sees Rachel. Now, we're gonna find out later he falls in love with her, right? But so you think, well, maybe he's a little bit smitten here, right? Something's going on here, because normally, because it kind of implied before, they rolled the stone away. Like it normally would take 2, maybe 3 guys to roll the stone away. Jacob's like, I'll roll this, I'll show her, He's like showing off, like, oh, I'll take care of it. Forget the sore muscles. I'll worry about that tomorrow, And he's like, and then not only does he roll the stone away by himself, then he single-handedly waters all of Laban's flocks. So he's just like, I'm a one-man wrecking machine. I'm just going to take care of it. I'm going to show off a little bit, kind of show her who I am, if you will. And then verse 11, and Jacob, it says, kissed Rachel. Now, that wasn't like a romantic kiss. That was like a family kiss, right? Like that's just a custom, right? And it says, and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was his father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all things about a whole family and everything, what God has done. And then Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Now, Jacob, it says he stayed with him for a month. I would imagine he's probably thinking, Mom said, it's only be a few days. What's a month, right? I'll stick around a little bit longer, especially there's a cute girl on the scene, like I'll hang out for a few more weeks, a couple more weeks, we'll see what happens. Little does he know, it's not going to be just another month. It's going to be another 20 years. Okay? Now, you got to love Jacob, though, as well, because as much as he has his flaws, and he does, you have to understand, he's a hard worker, right? He was, back in Canaan, when he was with his family, with Beersheba, he took care of all the flocks. He never, just kind of put it off. He took care of it, right? And you're going to see here that he was a hard worker. In fact, he just arrives. Think about this. He just arrives and he's rolling the stone away by himself. He's watering all the flocks. And then even beyond that, when he meets up with his uncle Laban, he is actually just jumping right in to actually take care of and help with the flocks. In fact, so much so that after a period of time, Laban's like, listen, you're working too hard. I can't let you just do this for free. I really need to pay you. I need to take care of you. You got to take care of you. So look at verse 15. It says, then Laban said to Jacob, Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes, and it describes them, right? Leah's eyes, it says, were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. So Laban is saying, look, tell me what your wages are. And the reason why they're bringing up the 2 daughters is obviously it's going to come into play in how Jacob responds. But it describes these 2 daughters. Now Leah, it tells us it was the elder. She was the oldest daughter. She was the older daughter. And it describes her, it's kind of interesting, as delicate eyes. So you're like, what does that mean? Well, the word delicate actually means weak or tender or timid. So in a sense, in essence, what they're describing is she is shy, right? She is shy and maybe introverted. She doesn't want to put herself out there. She kind of keeps to herself somewhat, You can kind of picture that, right? And then on the flip side, Rachel, it says that she was beautiful of form and appearance. Beautiful form is talking about her physical features. She's her body, if you will. She was she was a knockout, so to speak, or whatever. And then appearance was her face. So she was beautiful as well that way. So she was the whole package. There you go, if you want to call it that. Also, and she was a shepherdess, so she was a hard worker too, as well. So there you go. But also, here's something interesting that it says about her, and this is kind of something maybe you never even thought about. It says that she was the younger. Now, we think of the younger as just being that she was the younger sister, but that word younger doesn't just mean that she's younger in the order of being a sibling. It actually means small or little one. So I think more than likely Rachel was still more like a young teenager. She wasn't really older. And this also makes sense, right? As we see the response from Jacob as we move along, because in verse 18 it says, now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. Now, have you ever asked yourself, why would Jacob say, I'll serve you for 7 years? I mean, if she was a marrying age, he'd say, I'll just serve you a year or whatever. I'll serve you and for your daughter. I'm of the mindset and the belief that the reason why he said 7 years is because she wasn't of the marrying age yet, right? Maybe she looked mature for her age and whatnot and still was beautiful, but he was thinking, I need to wait, right? I need to wait. And really, I love this about Jacob because not only did he, feel that way as far as what was appropriate, he felt that way about her. In other words, she was worth the wait. She was worth the wait. And I think that picture right there, if you want to talk about shadows or pictures, that's a perfect picture of Jesus and as the bridegroom and the church, the bride, right? Because think about this. Jesus could have taken his bride years ago. And yet he has waited. He's waited for the bride to grow and to mature and to be complete, right? Because the bride here for us as a church is not just one person, it's many members being brought in to become the bride. And Jesus is saying, no, I don't want my bride to just be incomplete. I want her to be ready and full and mature and complete. All those ready to come in that makes the bride the bride. I'm going to wait, right? That's the picture here with Jacob. As well, Rachel was a shepherdess. So that picture's there, right? If we're the bride, like Rachel was the bride, we're also called to be shepherds of one another. We're also called to tend and take care of one another. So that's another picture there. And then I also think, just practically speaking, if you just looked at Jacob and how he handled himself with Rachel, there's a lot of practical principles for those that are, involved in dating, if you will, or in waiting, as you might say. Because Jacob, for Jacob, Rachel was well worth the wait, right? She was worth the wait. Again, speaks volumes. And, I think of, guys and girls, when they get together and maybe they're going to get engaged, and I'm not necessarily advocating 7 years kind of a thing, because I think there was extenuating circumstances. I believe her age probably prompted him to say, I need to wait, right? But I do believe that oftentimes we rush into marriage. I know I'm not looking over there. Don't just trust me. I'm just leaving that alone. But I believe this is what the scriptures bringing out right tonight. So that you rush in, especially if it's on the basis of physical appearance or attraction. I think waiting is a good thing, because waiting is a great revealer of character, right? Oftentimes we rush in, based on physical attraction rather than allowing that potential partner for life, to show forth their real character. Think about this. Anyone can put on a good front for a few months. They could even maybe put on a good front. I know, myself, we didn't have very long of a together. It just wasn't very long. Our story was like not the way most people should do things as far as how they got together. So I'm saying this through actual personal experience, right? Anyone can put on a front for a few months, maybe even for a few years. Could potentially, I don't know, maybe not a few years, maybe even a year. But think about this. If you're going to commit the rest of your life to somebody, you want to actually see them in difficult circumstances, in difficult situations. You want to find out how, as a Christian, how do they handle them? How do they handle those circumstances? What kind of decisions do they make within those things, those circumstances? As well, how do they deal with difficult people? You want to see that. How do they respond? You want to see godliness. You hope to see. Right? You pray for, you hope to see godliness rise to the surface out of those circumstances from their life. And so here, think about this. For Jacob, 7 years, man, his character, at least in this area, shines through. It shines through. So verse 19, we'll move on from there. Laban says, hey, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man, somebody that's not anyone, close to me or near to me. He says, stay with me, right? And then so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Isn't that so romantic? Although he's like, oh, the guys are like, yeah, right, Yeah, that's awesome, right? And I like the way it says it, because basically it's saying that in Jacob's eyes, he just stayed steady on, right? He worked hard and he stayed faithful. He didn't kind of get off track and get like, oh, there she is. I'm going to just go get off track here a little bit with her. No, he stayed faithful to what he had vowed to do. I'm going to work hard, and then God's going to bring this wife to me. I make that vow, right? Verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, 7 years up, right? Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, 7 years up, that I may go into her. In other words, I want to marry her. I want to get married. I want to consummate the marriage, vows and so on, right? And what I also see here in just that verse right there is that through those 7 years, Jacob was a perfect gentleman, right? He was a gentleman. He never once pressured Rachel into any kind of compromising circumstance or situation physically. He didn't say, oh, come on, it's been 5 years. You're old enough. We're going to be married in 2 more years. What's the big deal? What's the problem, right? What's the harm? Someone once said, men give love to get sex, but women give sex to get love. Right? And either way, that's not God's way. That is not God's way. So to the ladies, either here or online, I would say, listen, if a man's pressuring a woman to have, like before they're married, they're pressuring them to have sex before marriage, and by saying, oh, I love you, they don't. Or at least they don't know what love really is, because they don't understand what that means, what that is. Women should, listen, don't sell yourself for a lie. Do not sell yourself for a lie. Yeah. For men, our roles as men and even before you're married, but even after you're married, is to protect, is to honor, is to value the woman that God has put into our care. So if a Christian man, or a woman for that matter, pushes to have sex before marriage with the idea that once they're married, everything will be all right. Oh, we're going to be married anyway. It's all going to be all right. No, not true. Because think about this. If you're willing to compromise before you're married and not have any qualms with it, I tell you this much. You will compromise even after you're married. It's just a fact, because you didn't think of it in such a way. Now, I understand that oftentimes things happen, people make mistakes. I'm not talking about that, because but with those mistakes, with those sins, there's repentance, right? There's repentance, and there's we got to get back on track, and there's a seeking to turn away from that sin. So we'll move forward from there. Verse 22, Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. In other words, it's time for the wedding feast. Now, there's a problem. We're going to have a problem right off the bat, right? On day one of the wedding, of the marriage, because Laban pulls a fast one. You probably know the story, right? Verse 23. Now, it came to pass in the evening, this is Laban, he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her, and Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. We'll see her, Zilpah, later. But you're like, what? What happened? You're thinking, why wouldn't Jacob know, right? Why would he know that this was not Rachel? This was Leah, right? Well, here's some things, right? Here's some understanding of the culture. First of all, they would have worn a big veil over their face, right? And it would have been all covered. That's just the way they would have done it. That's kind of like the idea that you're veiled as a woman, and now after you're married, then you can unveil, and all that's revealed to the husband, and now because he's committed to her, right? They're one now. So see, it would have been veiled. I would also say, I'm sure by the time they got to the tent, that was dark. It didn't have chink chink, turn the lights on. They couldn't do that. It was just dark, right? I will probably add a third, and this is just kind of my speculation. They probably both were extremely nervous. I mean, I don't, how I was after when I first got married. It's like, hey, this is just all, kind of weird stuff, right? I mean, not to be weird about it, but, And so, I mean, for them, maybe it was all a blur. And so, but of course, when morning comes, literally everything will come to light. They were, somebody was like, yeah. Thanks, Don. That's true. They probably were drinking a little bit, celebrating. Right. So next morning, yes, comes to light, right? So it came to pass in the morning that behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? Ironic, right? The supplanter, Jacob, the deceiver, the trickster, the manipulator, the deceiver he's now the deceived, and the shoe now is on the other foot. And I feel like Jacob, in a sense, is getting a kind of a taste, if you will, of his own medicine, and he doesn't like it. And isn't that the case when, for us as well, when our sins always seem to look worse on other people than they do on us? Right? When it's us, so it's like, oh, it's just I'm weak, or oh, that's just how I am, or this. But when somebody else does the exact same thing, we're like, oh, they're terrible. How dare they? We're outraged. Outraged by what they do. Listen, I believe in these circumstances with Laban, and you're not gonna, this isn't just the first time. It's going to happen continually. God is showing Jacob what he looks like when he seeks to manipulate the circumstance, right? He is actually trying to use Laban to refine this area in Jacob's life. And think about this. Getting to know how it feels to be on the other side of the circumstance or situation is one of the best methods to learn not to do that, right? Verse 26, then Laban said, it must be done so in our country. I mean, I didn't tell you this beforehand, but to give the younger before the firstborn? Oh, we don't do that, So, fulfill her week, and I will give you this one also. I'll give you Rachel also for the service, which you will serve with me still another 7 years. I'm like, what? So, a lot of times we get the idea because we say, well, Jacob served 14 years for Rachel. Now, he didn't wait another 7 years. He only had to wait the 7 days, the 1 week, right? That was like basically the honeymoon period for Leah. And so he said, wait that time, and then after the 1 week, the 7 days, you can have Rachel, you can marry her, and then you guys, can be together. But you're going to have to serve me another 7 years. Now you're thinking, well, that is unfair. Yeah. But Jacob was like, okay, you know what? You got me. You got me good. And he acquiesced, right? He acquiesced. He just went along with it. Now, verse 28, move along. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week for Leah. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years. Now, you're going to see I love Rachel more than Leah, and that's going to just cause a lot of problems in the household. You're also going to see Zilpah and Bilhah, these maids, come along, and they're going to come into the equation. We'll get to it. Verse 31, now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So God was like, I'm gonna bless, give grace to Leah. Rachel gets the love of Jacob, so for now, she's gonna be barren, kind of a thing. So Leah, it says, conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. Reuben means see a son. There he is. For she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon, which means heard, because the Lord heard her. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi, which means attached. And then she conceived again and bore a son. This girl was fertile, and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, which means praise. But then it says, then she stopped bearing. So she had 4 kids I would imagine within a matter of less than 4 years. at least, or something to that effect. And so, but she stopped bearing. So we're just going to keep moving right into, because it just is a continuation into the next chapter, chapter 30. So look at verse 1. So there's 4 kids for Leah, Rachel, none. We're going to keep score here. 4 for Leah, 0 for Rachel. So Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, and Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. She's just really upset, right? And of course that's very understandable, because to be barren in that culture for a woman was to be shameful. It was a reproach upon her. And but the problem is going to Jacob and saying, give me children or else I die. That wasn't within Jacob's power. Right? That was in God's power, right? And so Jacob's going to respond to her. Now, he might be a little intense by getting angry, but his response, in a sense, was accurate. Look at verse 2. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So, yeah, maybe he got angry. Maybe he shouldn't have got angry, but he was correct. And that it was really up to God. It was in God's hands. Now, I think that it gives us a lesson, right? Because I think oftentimes we as people, we put too much expectation on those around us. Maybe a spouse or a loved one or a family member or a good friend or whoever. And we want them to fulfill us. We want them to satisfy certain aspects of our lives. And ultimately, it's only God that we can really look to for those needs. Now, God does use our spouse, or he does use family or friends and people that we care about. But we also need to keep in mind that it's ultimately the Lord working through them. right? And the reason why that's helpful is because if we keep our focus on the Lord, those very same loved ones or friends that we are looking to or that we once were looking to, they will fail us. Those people will fail us. I mean, you know, as a married person, we know we fail each other. There's just times we do. And so if we're keeping our eyes on the Lord, if keeping our focus right, we're not going to be so disappointed when they do fail us. Because we recognize it was really the Lord. It's the Lord all the time. So for Rachel, she was fixating her hurt on Jacob, and that was wrong. But worse than that is that the actions, when you start looking in the wrong direction for answers, you start making decisions and choices that are carnal, that are earthly, and you have carnal behavior, and that's what we see as we move forward. Look at verse 3. And so she says, so she has this solution, right? She says, here is my maid, Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. Then she gave him Bilhah to her maid as wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Dan means judge, right? So listen, we're going to see as we move along, this family is fast moving into the realm of reality show family, right? Like crazy drama family, right? But think about this. Rachel, she calls the son Dan because in her mind, she feels God has judged favorably on the situation. But let me tell you, that is not the case. Of course, yes, Dan becomes one of the tribes, the 12 tribes, yes. But Dan ends up becoming one of the worst tribes of the tribes of Israel for idolatry. So much so, when you get all the way to Revelation, and God lists through John the Apostle, lists the 12 tribes of Israel, Dan is not listed in those tribes, right? He's not listed. He's not even mentioned. Now, my name being Dan makes me go, ooh, man, that's kind of a bummer. But ultimately, really, my name is Daniel. And Daniel was actually considered one of the most faithful men in the Bible, so I feel a little bit more better about that. So that's just me. Now, the saga here, that moment, not over, right? Far from over. Verse 7, and Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali, which means my wrestling. Now, Rachel's like, I'm catching up. I mean, in her kind of warped thinking, it's not her, it's her maidservant. And now, at the same time, Leah's seeing this too as well. And she has stopped bearing children. And it's like, it's 4-2. She's catching up, you know. And so now she gets into the act. And she starts following Rachel's lead. Look at verse 9. And Leah saw that she had stopped bearing. So she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, a troop comes. Yeah, you got a lot of children going on in here. Something's happening here. And so she named him Gad, which means troop, right? And I think actually it can also mean potentially fortune. So maybe she's thinking, my fortune has changed, you know. Yeah. Verse 12. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters that will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher, which means happy. So it was one of the original 7 dwarfs. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, this is like becoming like the original Sister Wives, right? You know, I don't know if you know that reality show. It's like one of those really strange kind of reality shows. Anyway, I mean, this is just bizarre, right? And so if you think about it, Leah, she's happy because in her mind it's 6-2, right? I mean, so far, if you're counting, right? And just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, I mean, I'm just telling you, along comes these next verses. Really weird, okay? I'm just going to tell you right up front. Verse 14. Now Reuben would have been about 5, 6 years old. So don't think of him as like he's older now. He's just a little kid, little toddler kid. But Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." Now you're like, what are mandrakes? I don't even know what that is, right? So, mandrakes were an herbal plant. They actually were kind of like when you ingested them, like a drug, like a hallucinogenic, right? But in biblical times, it was thought to help with fertility, right? And that explains why Rachel is barren, hasn't had children, why she's so desperate to get her hands on some of those mandrakes. And, she's actually willing to make a deal. Like Leah's like, I'm not, where did you find those? I'm not telling you where my son found them, they're maybe hidden or whatever, And so she's willing to make a deal. Now this is where it really gets weird, because she's going to use her own husband as currency. Bizarre family, right? Verse 15. But she says to her, "It is a small matter that you take away. Is it a small matter that you take away my husband? Now you want to take away my son's mandrakes also? Like, you want it all, don't you, Rachel?" And Rachel said, "Well, therefore, I'll make a deal. Like, he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." Rachel or Leah accepts the deal, right? Because it says when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come into me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes, and he will lay with her." And he lay with her that night. I'm just telling you, if I were Jacob, I'd be like, what is going on here? That guy is probably like the most confused person, right? Running around all these children. Whose mother are you? I have no idea. Who am I with tonight? I'm like, oh my gosh. Like he's like a whirling dervish, like just can't figure it out. I don't know if he's the most happiest or the most exhausted or confused or just whatever. This guy doesn't even know which way is up. I kind of feel sorry for him, but he's letting it all happen. So, all right, the drama continues. Verse 17, and God listens to Leah, even though, so it's drama, God's using it, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband." So she called his name Issachar, it means wages. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. My husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons." He's like, now he's going to favor me more because I have given him more sons. Rachel hasn't given him any. So she calls her name Zebulun, which means dwelling, right? Because he's going to dwell with me. And then after that, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So it's the first gal, first woman, first girl in the family, if you will. So if you're keeping score, they were, obviously. It was 9 Leah, when of course that's 6 sons, 1 daughter, plus 2 through Bilhah, right? To 2 for Rachel through Zilpah. I think that's right. Anyway, maybe it's the other way around. Yeah, the 2 maidservants. Now, I would imagine for Leah, she probably felt, kind of fair chuffed, as you guys say, about herself at this point, right? 9-2. I'm way ahead in the count. But here we're going to see God now has compassion on Rachel. Verse 22. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." So she called his name Joseph. That means he will add, and said, "The Lord shall add to me another son." First thing you note is it says God listened to her and opened her womb. That's the first mention that she actually sought the Lord, or implied she sought the Lord about her circumstance, her situation. She prayed, she asked God, "God, help me, help me." Finally, she went to the Lord, and God said, "Okay, I'm going to open your womb." And she was so excited about her circumstance, and she was enthusiastic, to say the least, that she called her son Joseph, which means, again, he will add. In other words, in her excitement and her enthusiasm, she kind of thought, man, this isn't over yet. I'm so excited. I know he's going to give me another son, even beyond this one. Now, of course, we do know that happens. Benjamin, that's a little few years down the line. So it's at this point, all these children, this all happened within 7 years. Like, Jacob's a tired dude, man. Like, he is like, man, this is just crazy. This family is just like off the charts here. But the 7 years is up. And Jacob is basically like, look, enough is enough. Man, I need to get out of here. I need to go. This is a lot of crazy drama going on. I got to change the environment, if you will. Verse 25, and it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Then he said, you know what? I'm going to say this again. Second time he said this. Name your wages and I'll give it to you. Name your price. For you staying, I'll do whatever you ask, kind of a thing. Now, it's obvious he didn't want, Jacob to go. He understood God was blessing him by Jacob being there, right? And when Jacob had come, Laban's flocks and his wealth was little. Now in 14 years, Laban is a rich man. And really, Jacob, he's just still like a servant, basically, right? He's not really getting anything from it other than he has wives and children and a crazy household, right? So he's like, well, name your wages, right? And so even though he really wanted to get out, he sees, okay, here's a plan. I got a plan here. I have a plan, and after all of this, right? Even though he's been taken advantage of all these years by Laban, and to some degree by his own wives, Jacob is still heel catcher, right? He's still supplanter. He's still Jacob, and so we're going to see this. He thinks that he has some master plan to kind of get one over on Laban and to take advantage of him. And yet what he's going to find out and what we're going to see is that there's really no need. He didn't have any need to try to take advantage or to manipulate the circumstance because God was already on Jacob's side. You remember all the way back in Bethel when he had that dream, God told him that I will be with you, Jacob. I will take care of you. I will bless you, right? He would do all of that. And yet Jacob still hasn't learned, right? He's going to try to think, at least in his mind, manipulate the circumstance, the situation. So look at verse 29. We're kind of coming towards the end of the chapter here. So Jacob said to him, you know, to Laban, I've served you, and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own household? So he's saying basically, look, it's really all about, I just need to provide for my own household. I'm a man, I have wives, I have a lot of children, I got a lot to take care of, so I need to do this. Now, Laban says, well, what shall I give you? What do you want? And this is interesting what Jacob says. He says, you shall not give me anything. You're not going to give me anything. If you will do this for me, and he's going to tell him what wants him to do. He says, I again will feed and keep your flocks. But I love this because his response is kind of akin to, remember Abraham's response when he went to war and took back his son or his nephew Lot and his family back from, for the king of Sodom. And the king of Sodom was grateful, and he said, I'll give you whatever. And let me just ask what you want, and I'll give it to you, kind of a thing. And Abraham's like, I don't want anything from you. right? So very similar. What Jacob's saying is basically Jacob didn't want anything from Laban. In other words, he didn't want at any point that Laban would turn around and say, well, you're wealthy, or you're blessed because of what I gave to you. I, had a part in this, right? And I think that's very wise for us as believers to not rely upon the world for our blessings. We need to trust in the Lord. I think especially if God's calling us to step out in faith, in a big way or something, God is saying just trust in me, right? Trust in me. Don't look to the world for your provision, because God wants all the glory. I think of Isaiah 42:8, where God says, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my glory to anyone else, nor share my praise with carved idols. So God wants to work through us so that he gets all the glory. That man can't say, look, I increased God, so to speak. So now Jacob has a plan, or at least this is his plan. We're going to see this. And he tells us to Laban in verse 32, he says, let me pass through all your flock today. This is what I want. Remove from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come. When the subject of my wages comes before you, everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs, it will be considered stolen if it is with me. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. Now, what was he doing? Well, in those days, sheep were meant to be white. Fluffy white sheep. Goats were meant to be black, right? And if there were any variations, they were seen as inferior. So the spotted, the speckled, the streaked, the brown, and so on and so forth, those were inferior. So what Jacob was saying basically is, you know what I'll do? You're my wages, I'll take all the inferior. I'll take all those that you consider as less, and I'll take them from me. Those will be my wages. Anyone that come out from your flock that become spotted and speckled, and in Laban's mind, he's like, you're going to take all the worst? Have at it, right? I'll give it to you. Like, go for it, right? In other words, he took all the rejects as his wages. But I love this, because isn't that exactly how it is with the kingdom of God, right? 1 Corinthians 1:26 and 27. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Yeah, praise the Lord. Because, I hate to break it to us, if you're not thinking this, that's us. Listen, we're the foolish. We're the base. We're the weak. We're the are-nots. Right? You're not the R's. You're the are-nots. That's exactly who we are. We're the are-nots. And yet, here's the truth. God takes those are-nots. Takes us, right? The weak, the foolish, the base, the despised. And he starts to mold us. He starts to work in us by the power of the Holy Spirit. He starts to make us, conform us into those who are strong because of him. Those who are wise because of him. Those who are accepted by God through Christ, right? And so when people see us, they might see strength. They might see wisdom. They might see, God's blessing upon us. But it's not because of who we are, right? It's because of who God is, and he can receive all of the glory. And so that is what we are seeing here with Jacob. Jacob's going to do what Jacob does. We're going to see in the next few verses. He's going to scheme, but ultimately, and what we need to see here and understand here, and we will see this as we move through, all the while it's God. It's God working. So let me just read. I'm going to read the last few verses here, last several verses. So Jacob, removed that day the male goats that were speckled and the spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of his sons. Then he put 3 days' journey. This is Laban. He put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock. So Laban was like, I don't want to have any, like, if you're going to do this, we're going to just keep them separated, right? 3 days' journey. But Jacob still worked for Laban all those years. Now, Jacob, it says, took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods, and the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the water troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. Now, what was he doing? Well, he was thinking of a way to cause the sheep and the goats to go into heat, so that they would start to mate more often, more regularly, not just the normal cycles. So that in his mind, this was his way of kind of getting them to create more sheep, have more flock and so on. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban, but he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became extremely prosperous and had large flocks. Then it says female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Now, I won't even go into a lot of the details of what he's trying. It's like he was trying to figure out a way to, create this kind of, we're going to, separate these ones. We're going to have them face a certain way, and all these kind of means of manipulation. And yes, he became extremely prosperous. But look, it says female and male servants, camels and donkeys. That has nothing to do with the flocks. Right? God was prospering, right? So in Jacob's mind, he was doing all these, mental and physical gymnastics, manipulating the situation, when all the while, even though, maybe there's some wisdom if you think about it within that, it was really God's hand. Because God was the only one that could make them be born spotted and speckled and whatnot. I mean, he could have made them born all white for the lambs and then all black for the goats. He could have done that. But God was causing them to be born a certain, these certain colors or the certain stripings and so on. So it was always the Lord working. Listen, and that's what we have to remember. Listen, the Lord is with us. The Lord is for us. We don't have to manipulate the circumstances and the situations. Romans 8:28 says, we know that all things work together for the good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:31, for if God is for us, who can be against us? 2 Corinthians 9:8, and God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. So the truth is, right? We don't have to. We can be like Jacob in that God is for us. God is working. He's going to work through our circumstances and in our situations, and he's going to take care of us. But we also don't have to be like Jacob and thinking we have to manipulate the circumstances. We have to help God out, right? It's all about what we're doing. No, it's not about what we're doing. It's about the Lord who cares for us, who takes care of us. And we're going to learn more as we move forward in Genesis about the life of Jacob. But let's go ahead and pray.